One of my favorite TV shows growing up was The Muppet Show, and that says something about me, probably, that we won't discuss. But I love The Muppet Show, and in particular, I love the two grumpy old men in the balcony. Remember those guys? The two grumpy guys that lived up there that they tended to taunt everybody who came on stage. Anybody remember their name? Bonus points if you know their names. Anybody know it? Oh, we got one. Very good. Statler and Waldorf. I didn't know that. I looked it up, but I didn't know their names. But if you learn nothing else, you know that. Okay? And so Statler and Waldorf sat up in the balcony, and they made fun of everybody who came on stage. It was their job. They felt their personal job, their personal ministry, to make sure that everyone who came on the stage felt less about themselves. Okay? And they used their words, and they used their attitude to do that. Okay? And it was funny on stage. I want to show you a little clip of that. If some of you who are a little bit older, remember Milton Berle, right? He was a comedian back in the day, and this is a little interaction that Milton Berle had with Statler and Waldorf. So take a look, if you would, please.
Thank you, and good evening. And I want to thank you, Kermit. Thank you for your wonderful introduction. First time I've ever been introduced by an amphibious MC. Because you know what amphibious means? It means he can be dull on land or water. I feel great. I really feel wonderful. I just got back from a pleasure trip. I took my mother-in-law to the airport. And while I was there... Funny! I heard about them. It's beginning. You're the two guys that I heard about that heckle from the box, aren't you? There they are, ladies and gentlemen. Get a look at them. Starsky and Crutch. Don't start with me, boys. Don't start with me, please.
Hey, Burl.
What?
You know what? I've just figured out your style.
Really?
You work like Gregory Peck.
Gregory Peck's not a comedian.
Well?
Now, just a minute, please. I have been a successful comedian half of my life.
How come we got this half?
Look, did you come in here to be entertained or not?
That's right.
What's right?
We came in here to be entertained, and we're not.
Oh, yeah? I'd like to see you come down here and be funny.
You first.
The audience. Don't pay any attention to him, folks. He's the 9th child of a family of 8. Let me tell this story.
Hey, Burl.
Oh, yes, what is it? What is it?
You know what you're doing wrong?
What am I doing wrong?
You're standing too close to the audience.
Oh, yeah? How's this?
You're still too close.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is this okay?
Yeah, a little more.
How far back do you want me to go?
You got a car?
All right, very good. So you get the gist of that, right? You probably would like, if it gets boring in here, we'll just crank that back up, okay? So that'll be all right. But you get the gist of that, and that's funny, right? To watch that play back and forth. And as a kid, I always took great pleasure with my sibling, with my sister, of trying to be the grumpy old guy. And everything she said, I tried to make a joke or put her down or dig at her with my words. And my children have inherited that as well. And so I don't think it's just a Reynolds family thing. I think it's just a human nature thing that we can tend to want to tear people down with our words. And words have incredible power to do that. But I was struck by a pastor this week. I was reading a message that he had presented on the topic we're going to look at today about our words. And he made this comment when he said that we hold the reputation of others in our hands. And that struck me because I didn't oftentimes think of with my words that I'm really holding someone's reputation, the way that they are thought of by others. I have an input on that. I have an influence on that. And that struck me, and it made me think of this passage from Genesis chapter 4. You remember early in the Bible, you meet Adam and Eve, and they have their first kids, Cain and Abel. And Cain and Abel have a fight over church, right? Who was acceptable at church and who did the right thing. Cain's unhappy. Abel is blessed by God. And Abel, instead of changing to become like Abel, Cain decides to kill his brother. And so he murders him in a field, and God comes and has a conversation with Cain, and he asks him this question. He says, "Where's your brother Abel?" "I don't know," which is a lie. But then he says this, "Am I my brother's keeper?" And the implied answer, there's not an answer given in the text, but the implied answer that God expects Cain to get is that yes, you are responsible for your brother. His well-being is your responsibility. And I think that is true, certainly, when we talk about the well-being of his life. It was certainly we should value life. We talked about that a few weeks ago when Michael shared that thought. But I think that applies to our words as well. When we think about, I hold the reputation of other people in my hands. I am responsible for what other people think of people around me. And my words, what I say about them, how I speak to them, is a way in which I am my brother's keeper. And so I want us to think today about that topic. This summer we've been challenging ourselves to look at our character by looking at this passage in Proverbs chapter 6. And you're probably getting a little tired of it by now, and we're almost done with it. Tyler's going to wrap it up next week. But I want you I've been challenged every week in this as I've looked at my character in these little ways, and I think it's been helpful, and I hope it has for you as well. But listen to what the writer of Proverbs says again, and where we come to today. There are 6 things that the Lord hates, 7 that are detestable to him. Haughty eyes, those prideful eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked schemes, feet that are quick to rush into evil, and a false witness who pours out lies. It's interesting to me as I read that the issue of honesty shows up twice. I think it's interesting, in a list of 7 things that God hates, dishonesty shows up twice. And there's probably something that we should pause and meditate upon that and think, why is that? Why does God emphasize 2 things in the arena of honesty that show up there? The first reference we looked at several weeks ago was a more broad one. It's just general dishonesty. It's that lying tongue. It's just a heart that just doesn't tell the truth. And we looked at the idea that Jesus pushes us and encourages us to be an honest people, and we should pursue honesty and truthfulness in our character. But the second one has more of a focus to it. It's more of a courtroom scene. When you think of a witness, that's where you think of as a courtroom. You're talking to someone in authority. You're giving something that matters not just to you, but it probably matters to other people as well. What you're saying has an impact upon other people's lives and their well-being and their futures. And so this picture is one really of a person who commits perjury, accusing an innocent person of something they didn't do, or not coming to the defense of someone that is innocent, and you have the ability to change that, how they're thought of. It's the picture of being asked about another person, and again, in that moment, you hold another person's reputation, you hold their future in your hands. And it causes us to ask the question, I think, and I hope today, is what do we say about other people? How do we talk about other people? Because really, this is a topic that, whether you look at the big upper level view from above, or you look at the micro level of our daily interactions, I think if you're like me, we have a hard time sometimes harnessing the tongue. We have a hard time training it and using it so that we're always saying words that we're building other people up and not using our tongue to tear others down. Again, we hold other people's reputation in our hands, and it's our words that make the difference oftentimes. Your words hold incredible power over what other people think of an individual. And with your words, you can build or you can destroy. And I want you to see with me here today that God has a great concern for what you say, and has much to say about what we have to say about others. And so I want to look at this from 2 levels. I want to look at from the upper level view of why this is a big deal to God, why this honesty thing matters to him. Number 1 is this. I think it matters to him because God understands that a just and fair society can't exist without honesty. Much of the text, the language that we are going to read here, comes from a context in which God was trying to establish a society, not just a church community of people of all kinds of places, but he's trying to establish a nation. And Israel was going to be a physical place with real borders and boundaries and cities, and they had to learn to get along together and work together. They're going to succeed. So God understands in much of the Old Testament, when you read the words we're going to read about a false testimony, he's talking about, look, if you're going to succeed as a people, if the nation of Israel is going to succeed and even thrive, it depends greatly upon the honesty of the people that live there. For example, this ties right in with the 9th commandment, that when God gave his Big Ten laws, that this is the foundational cornerstone of your society, these 10 things, the 9th commandment was simply this in Exodus 20, verse 16. It says, you shall not give false testimony about your neighbor. In other words, when you're called to court, you are to be honest. And if you choose not to, you're not just breaking a commandment, you are eroding the foundation of what makes it possible for you to be together as a people. And in the pages that follow that, there's a lot of ink and ongoing emphasis on this because God knew that no society can succeed and thrive when its citizens won't tell the truth in a court of law. There's corruption and injustice that begin to rule the day when we aren't honest and testifying about what's going on. That was true in Israel. That's true in America. That's true in any group of people, any civilization. There must be a willingness of people to be honest. If they're not, you're going to have corruption and injustice that will rule the day. And wherever you have those, you have the pushback of hatred and anger that will fill the culture because there's this constant sense of injustice. And so much of our political and social environment wrestles with a lot of that today. And so I want you to listen to the way that God would put it in Leviticus chapter 19, when God would say this, again, emphasizing the fact that God loves justice. He loves a just and a fair society, and that's what he tried to build. In Leviticus 19, it says, do not pervert justice, do not show partiality to the poor or favoritism to the great, but judge your neighbor fairly. Neither one are better or greater, just be fair with each other in how you interact. And then he goes on in the next verse to give an example of how we pervert justice, when he would say this, do not go about spreading slander among your people. So how do we erode justice? How do we pervert justice? Our words. When we slander others, when we say accusing things, do not do anything that endangers your neighbor's life. In lying, you can find lots of cases in the Bible of false witnesses who told a lie and someone else either was put to death or faced terrible consequences because of it. So our tongue, again, in Israelite culture, held people's reputation. And their reputation wasn't just about what people think of them. Sometimes the reputation meant that person can't live anymore because I've accused them of a capital offense or a punishable or a crime you could be put to death for, whatever that word is, okay? And so you get that idea. Justice is perverted and twisted when we tell lies instead of truth in our courts and in general conversations. God would say this in Exodus 23, verse 1, do not spread false reports. Do not help a guilty person by being a malicious witness. Again, that call to be honest when you're in a court setting. Now, you may not think this is a big deal. It may not be anything in your life right now where you're thinking, well, this is nice. Nice political talk, and that's good, but that doesn't apply to me. But over my life, I've seen lots of people, and I've been in situations where sometimes all of a sudden becomes very real. Maybe you're in a divorce situation, a divorce court, and someone lies about you, says something that you don't think is true, and all of a sudden your demand, your call for justice becomes very passionate inside of you. Or there's a report, you're in a car accident, and someone says something you don't think is right, and your desire for justice and fairness and honesty becomes very relevant. You're in an estate dispute or an argument with a coworker, or you're in a classroom situation, and it's he said versus she said, and you care about fairness and honesty and justice all of a sudden. It becomes very huge, and you get very passionate about it when it applies to you. And so we read these words and we realize that God knew what he was talking about when he said that any society, it has to have, if it's going to succeed, it must be built upon an attitude of honesty. In fact, God was so serious about this that he had harsh penalties put in place for those who were caught lying as a witness. Deuteronomy 19 would say this, that the judges must make a thorough investigation, and they're investigating the witnesses, and if the witness proves to be a liar, giving false testimony against a fellow Israelite, then do to the false witness as that witness intended to do to the other party. So in other words, if that witness was testifying that he did some punishable offense that's going to chop his hand off or lose his life, then do it to the witness if he's lying, okay? And God was serious about that, and his motivations for were this. He goes on to say, you must purge the evil from among you. The rest of the people will hear of this and be afraid, and never again will such an evil thing be done among you. So he was trying to, as a parent sometimes does, use a little fear to deter people from doing something that you don't want to exist. Show no pity, life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, and foot for foot. And so God was serious about that as he built a civilization that you've got to take this seriously, because your society won't succeed. And as you read Israel's history, the times they went into the valleys, they didn't succeed very well. One of the things the prophets continued to chastise them for was they didn't have a heart for justice. They didn't look out for the poor. The rich lied and took advantage of people, and people were just not honest, and their courts were a mess. Romans chapter 1, verse 29 puts it more in our times, when it goes from more of a cultural, national feel to just a heart before God. Romans chapter 1 describes what we become when we walk away from our faith in God, when we believe in God. He would describe it this way, that they've become filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, greed, and depravity. They are full of envy and murder and strife, deceit. Dishonesty comes with a heart that's not following after God, and malice. They are gossips and slanderers. See how we begin to twist the truth when it's all about me and protecting me or promoting me, then I'm going to twist the truth into whatever I want it to be, and it doesn't matter what it does to someone else. And that becomes a very ugly place to live. Jesus would understand that. Jesus, the whole reason he went to a cross was because of false witnesses. Matthew 26, the chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin, they're trying like crazy to find something that they can execute Jesus on. And they can't find it, but they're looking for false evidence against Jesus so that they could put him to death. But they did not find any, though many false witnesses came forward. So Jesus knew very well that one of the attacks that comes from people who don't either honor God or care about the truth is that they're just going to use whatever false thing they can do to tear someone down. And that's exactly what they did to Jesus. There was nothing that you could pin on him. Pilate, the governor, even said, this guy's innocent. He doesn't deserve to die. He caved to the pressure later, but there was nothing. But it was false witnesses who continued to spin lies that led to Jesus dying. And Jesus would even tell us as his followers in the Beatitudes, he gets to the bottom of the list of all these things that you're blessed when you are, and note the last one in verses 11 and 12 of Matthew 5. Blessed are you when people insult you or persecute you and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. So what's he warning us about? That if you're trying to live a righteous life, you and I aren't perfect. There's flaws in our life, and so I'm not saying that we're perfect. But one of the things that the world, that the enemy will do, is he will attack us. He will make all kinds of false accusations against us. One of the things they attacked the early church about was that they were cannibals, because they kept hearing that they drank the blood of Jesus and they ate the body of Jesus. So they slandered them. They falsely accused them of being cannibals, which wasn't the truth. But Jesus says, rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. So one of the things that we will oftentimes do when we're trying to get rid of someone is we will try to spin the truth, and we'll become a false witness. And so as you look at the big picture of just any society, it's not going to exist. It's not going to thrive. It's not going to do well without a commitment to honesty. And so how do we get the big picture to be a place where honesty dwells and is thriving? It starts with individuals. It starts at the small level. It starts with people like you and I who make a commitment to say, I'm going to pursue honesty in my life. And that's the second thing I want you to see. That community and unity cannot exist without honesty. So if we're going to have a civilization that exists, it's got to start with people that are willing to say, on the one-on-one level, I'm going to pursue a level of honesty in my life, and I'm going to treat other people that way so that community can begin to develop, relationships can be whole, there's trust and there's unity, and we can work together, we talk together, we communicate together. So community and unity, they build into a greater society as a whole. But the Bible uses two words to describe how we use our mouths to tear down and to destroy others. And those two words in the Bible are gossip and slander. Gossip and slander. Throughout the Bible, you get this clear teaching on how much God hates these things in our life when they exist. And if we're honest, if I'm honest, There's times when I struggle and I catch my tongue. I'm saying more than I should, trying to make myself look better at someone else's expense. And then we do all kinds of things in this category of gossip and slander because we're trying to protect ourselves or promote ourselves. And yet, as I read through these verses, I was reminded again how ugly we are when we take on these kinds of traits. God hates them because of how they destroy friendships, how they destroy family, how they destroy community, all of these things that God designs and loves, and he wants them to thrive, but they're destroyed by gossip and slander. Whether you're talking about a church, whether you're talking about your family, talking about your school, wherever it may be, your workplace. Gossip and slander, you know the effects of it. It's ugly, it's nasty. And listen to what the Bible says. Proverbs chapter 16, verse 28 tells us why it is that way. It says, a perverse person stirs up conflict. So where does gossip come from? It comes from a heart that's twisted, but they're trying to stir up people because it's either protecting me or it's benefiting me. There's protection or promotion. And a gossip separates close friends. So what does gossip do? Gossip erodes the foundational thing that a friendship is based upon, which is trust and communication and respect for each other. But gossip just tears that apart. It becomes something ugly. And then it adds with this, Proverbs 26, verse 20, says, without wood, a fire goes out. And without a gossip, a quarrel dies down. What do you do when you find out someone's gossiping about you? You get really angry, don't you? It stirs up what's inside of you. You got this fire inside of you. How dare he say that? How dare they say that about me? And we don't like that. It stirs the pot, right? It stirs up a fire inside of us. And so when we gossip, not only does it erode the trust of what relationships are built upon, but it also just stirs up a fire inside to say, I'm ready to fight now. And that's not a good foundation for relationships. But also verse 20 or chapter 20, verse 19 says, a gossip betrays confidence. So avoid anyone who talks too much. Thought about that phrase this week, avoid someone who talks too much. And I had to qualify this first service because my wife says I never talk enough to her, okay? So the one catch to this, I should talk more to my wife, probably less to everybody else. And that's probably a healthier thing because in a world in which I can talk, but not only can I talk with my voice, I have access to an entire world through my phone, and I can talk to dozens of people, hundreds of people through social media and all kinds of things. I can talk and talk and talk and talk. And if you're like me, I bet the more that you find yourself talking, the more you find yourself diving into gossipy kinds of things, slanderous kinds of things. And so maybe it's just wise for us sometimes to realize it's time for me to stop talking, and that's okay. But husbands, don't tell your wives that. Just trust me on that. Don't tell your wives. Say, honey, we've talked too much. Don't do that, okay? But overall, in general, we should just be careful because the more we talk, the more we set ourselves up to delve into things that are just not going to be good, all right? But here's the deal. It's this whole idea of confidence. It's this whole idea of trust that gossip and slander destroys. Proverbs 11, verse 13 says, a gossip betrays the confidence, but a trustworthy person keeps the secret. And so gossip does all these things. It betrays trust. It erodes love and respect between people. It does all these things that destroys community. And so we get these New Testament verses. One more from Proverbs here real quick before we do that. The words of a gossip, because not only do we like to speak it, often, maybe we don't like to speak it. Maybe we just like to hear it, right? You say, I would never say that, but I want to hear it. So we just have an ear that tunes into it. When someone's talking about somebody else, we want to listen to the table next to us because I'm learning something. This is juicy. And that's what Proverbs describes gossip as. When it says this in chapter 18, it says the words of a gossip are like choice morsels. They taste good, don't they? It's kind of fun, kind of to know something, to be in the know, to say, hey, I know what's going on with him. Did you hear about them? I know that information. We feel bigger. We feel more powerful about ourselves. And so the words of a gossip are like choice morsels. They go down to the inmost parts. And so we have a thriving magazine business and so TV shows and internet stuff that you can find. You can search all day long on gossip about what's this celebrity doing or what's going on here. It just can be a dangerous trap. And we hunger for it because we feel more important when we know, I guess. But the New Testament then would say this. The heart of what it means to be maturing in our faith in Christ is that we have a life direction that says, I see that negative. I see that quality in me that God hates, he disdains, and so I'm moving in a different direction. Colossians chapter 3, verse 8 would say this, but now you must also rid yourselves of all such things as these. This is what a mature Christian is growing into. You're ridding yourselves of anger and rage and malice and slander and filthy language. You're getting rid of that slander. When you feel that temptation to do that, you recognize that's not a godly trait in me. I'm not honoring God by slandering someone else with my words. And so I begin to resist that and work in other ways. Titus chapter 3, verses 1 and 2 would give us a picture of how we live in society when it says, remind the people to be subject to rulers and authorities, to be obedient, to be ready to do whatever is good, to slander no one. That's a challenging verse. To slander no one. Whether you like them or not, whether they've been great to you or not, just be careful, because when you hold someone else's reputation in your hands, you can slander them, you can gossip them to death, but instead be peaceable, be considerate, always be gentle towards everyone. There's just a more mature way of handling those things in life. James chapter 4 would say, brothers and sisters, do not slander anyone. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 1, I highlighted some important words in this. Therefore, rid yourselves of all malice, all deceit, hypocrisy, envy, and slander of every kind. Those are challenging verses when you begin to think and you think, what does that mean? How does that affect the way that I speak every day? Probably changes some things. Maybe I just begin to rein myself in. I had a friend named Wayne that I knew back in Illinois, one of my favorite people on earth. But whenever I would find myself in a group of people and we would begin to bump up against that gossip thing, or we begin to slander someone with our words, just kind of sitting around shooting the breeze. But if we ever wandered into that territory, I know we were getting close, because Wayne would, in that moment, he would say, that person's got this really good quality about them. And he would change the conversation, because he would say something good about someone that the rest of us are ready to trash or put down or be down on. And yet Wayne would find some good thing. We may have been saying true things, but Wayne's words would change the direction of the conversation, because he would say something positive about someone the rest of us were looking to trash. And the rest of us just kind of quieted down, because we got what he was doing. He never rebuked us. He never told us we were a bunch of jerks, gossiping, slandering jerks. But he just said, let's go a different direction with our words. And I appreciated that about him, because, again, sometimes I just tend to let my mouth go before the mind engages, and I find myself in places I shouldn't have been, and he would bring me back. And so I appreciated that about that maturity in his life. He was very guarded. He was very slow before he would ever put someone down or say something negative about someone. And that, I think he echoes a little bit of what Ephesians 4 would call us to be and to say. It says, do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths. Gossip and slander would certainly be a part of that, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs. And if you really lived that verse out, what would happen to the people around you? Would they think, I don't know what happened to my husband, but this is not the same guy I lived with yesterday. This is a different man, or this is a different woman that I lived with yesterday, because yesterday it was all negative. Today it's thoughtful, it's purposeful, it's building up. Philippians 4:8 is a good guide, sometimes about our thinking, but also about our speaking. It says, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. So again, this applies in probably 100 different directions in your life, because your life is different than mine. But I just think if we walk into the week with this mindset of thinking, okay, the tongue, I'm going to hold people's reputations in my hands, and my tongue is either going to build or it's going to destroy. It's either going to shed positive light or it's going to shed negative light. And my tongue is such a powerful vehicle to do those things. So I just want to challenge you with that the next time that you hold another person's reputation in your hands, in your mouth, I hope this question will come to your mind that we see from Genesis chapter 4. Again, when God would ask the question, am I my brother's keeper?